Okay, so in this lesson I'm going to present you Blast, which is an Ethereum Layer 2 solution that provides the native yield functionality for Ethereum and stablecoins. When you have some ETH inside the Blast system, you get some income, which is really cool. This course is for developers after all, so we are talking about technical things, not about financial things, and so that's why we are mostly interested what is a layer 2 solution and how it works. So first of all, it's important to mention that the layer 2 term is basically a collective term that describes certain scaling solutions for Ethereum. So in a nutshell, this is a separate blockchain, but it extends Ethereum. So it's like, we're building a house. So we have the first floor, and this is going to be layer 1, and that's our Ethereum. But then we can also create layer 2, the next floor. And that's where, for example, Blast lives, but there are other solutions out there as well. So we are using the Ethereum ecosystem as a basis to build something new. But the question is, why do we need this layer 2 in the first place? Nowadays, Ethereum is really popular, and it has three desirable properties. So it should be decentralized, it should be secure, and it should be scalable, right? But the problem is that, there is this triangle. Here we have decentralization, here we have security, and here we have the scalability. And so there should be some kind of a balance. So we can make things really decentralized and really secure, but in this case we'll have problems with scalability and vice versa. So it's impossible to make a perfect system because, unfortunately we live in an imperfect world. And so while Ethereum is really decentralized and secure, as for the scalability, there are some issues, as you probably know, because currently, every day Ethereum processes 1 million of transactions. The demand is really high, which means that the gas prices, they grow and grow. That's one thing. And another thing is that, there should be some kind of a throughput, how many transactions we can actually run, right? That's where your layer 2 solutions come into play, because they were created to solve the problems with the scalability and with the transaction throughput, and to try to make the gas prices lower. That's the main purpose of this whole layer 2, basically. Roughly, we can say that mainnet can process something around 13 or maybe 15 transactions per second, which is, not too great, to be honest. But when we have the layer 2 solution, we can make these numbers greater by the factor of 10 to something like 100. So with layer 2 we can process not 15 transactions, but basically 1500 transactions, which is really impressive. And at the same time, the gas prices can be really low. There are many different solutions operating at layer 2 out there. The most typical solutions revolve either around the optimistic rollups, or also there is a separate technology, that is called zero knowledge. So Blast is based on optimistic rollups. That's why we're not going to cover zero knowledge here. While these solutions are actually good as well, they are more complex from the point of all the cryptography behind those. If you would like to learn more about optimistic rollups, there is a very nice article on ethereum.org that covers all the information. But I'm going to give you a gist of what's going on here. As the name implies, these rollups mean that we have many transactions, hundreds of those transactions that are sent by different users. So we take all those transactions, we roll those together in one rollup, and this rollup becomes a single super transaction that is then being sent to Ethereum, to the layer 1, basically. So here on layer 2 we compose all the transactions that people send to us. We get like a big transaction and then we send it to Ethereum. So in a nutshell, that's how it works. Also, it's important to notice that the execution of those like initial transactions are done separately by the rollup. But we also submit the information about those transactions to Ethereum, so the data is still somehow stored here. So those like two layers are interconnected. It's not like we have like a separate system that has nothing to do with Ethereum. It's not the case really. But from what you can see, the system, well, mainly operates outside of Ethereum. So mainly it operates like off-chain, shall we say. So many actions are performed off-chain, and then we send only the necessary data to Ethereum, thus reducing the costs. Because, well, the main problem with Ethereum and Layer 1 is that we have to perform many different computations, right? We have to process every transaction separately, and it takes a lot of resources, obviously. And so as long as the rollup does the heavy lifting and processes these transactions initially, we can take part of the burden from Ethereum, and that's why this solution is much faster. So once again, it can be a factor of 100 or something like that, whereas the gas prices might be really low. Why? Because, well, as long as we are sending one mega transaction to Ethereum, it means that we have to pay for the gas only once. So we pay only once, and it means that this payment is spread between all the users who have submitted their transactions to this rollup. And so maybe if we have to pay like $10 for the gas in total, but there are, I don't know, 100 users who have submitted this transaction to the rollup, they will have to pay less than $1. So that's really, really cool. Also, these rollups, they actually compress the data, and in fact, all the information about these transactions is sent to Ethereum in the form of cold data. When the transaction arrives in Ethereum, the cold data is stored inside logs, and so that's why we can guarantee that this data is basically immutable. But it's interesting that in fact, off-chain, there is a separate virtual machine that works with these rollups. And so we use this virtual machine to actually process these transactions. And this is actually an EVM compatible virtual machine, which means that, for example, your smart contracts that you write for Ethereum, you actually don't need to modify those anyhow. And later in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to actually deploy your contracts to Layer 2. Here is an example of this super transaction that was created on another Layer 2 solution that is called Optimism. And you can see that here is your cold data that was sent to Ethereum actually. And you can see that this is like a really huge list of bytes that contains compressed data from all the initial transactions that were sent by different users to this rollup. As long as this data is inside the logs, we can, well, safely see it on the Etherscan and make sure that everything is nice. But of course, there should be some kind of a fraud protection to make sure that, well, no one like cheats, right? And so these rollups are called optimistic because by default, we consider all the transactions that are sent to us to be valid, to be correct. But well, if someone like spots some problems, that someone can like publish special fraud proof. So he can basically say that, yeah, you know what, this transaction was invalid, here is my proof. Of course, it is not done by regular customers, obviously, so there are special mechanisms to introduce this behavior, but still, there is a way to prove that something was incorrect. And actually, these fraud proofs must be published during a so-called challenge period. And usually this challenge period is quite long. It might be up to a week, which in turn means that this super transaction is not actually finalized on Layer 1 until this challenge period expires. Because if this transaction is finalized like immediately, it will be impossible to somehow undo the changes inside layer 2, right? That's why, while these transactions sent by the customers are processed by this rollup really fast, the finalization of those transactions in layer 1 might take quite a bit of time. So unfortunately, that's the downside of the optimistic rollups. You might actually think that it is not really convenient because, for example, if this huge transaction will be finalized only in a week, what if there will be subsequent transactions that are somehow related to this transaction, to the modifications that were done within this transaction? Well, it's not a big deal, so it's possible to work on an unconfirmed rollup block, but if some problems are spotted in the previous transactions that you rely your subsequent transactions on, so all your changes will be reverted as well. Here is a simple demonstration. So let's say that initially we submitted this super transaction in like the block number 1, and then there is a challenge period, but then you create another rollup transaction, well, like number 2, and it is somehow related to the data that were modified maybe within this transaction. So what happens in this case? Well, nothing bad happens unless someone spots a problem with this rollup. And so if a fraud proof is published in this case, so these changes are reverted, and this subsequently means that these changes will be reverted as well. And by the way, it's also important to mention that as long as all the data is stored within the call data, we don't really modify the state within the smart contracts anymore. And it also makes the gas prices somewhat cheaper. Well, because storing data inside the state is quite expensive. Now the question is how the layer 2 is actually connected to layer 1. Because so we know there is an EVM compatible virtual machine that is run here. So we have these rollups, but then we have to send our transactions somewhere on chain, right? So where these transactions are sent. So let's draw this line, meaning that this is like our on chain and everything outside is off chain. In fact, the layer 2 solutions say that there is a special smart contract or maybe a set of smart contracts that actually handle the incoming super transactions. So when the rollup is actually completed, this rollup is forwarded to a known address that resides on chain. For example, in Blast, you can find information about Blast contracts on layer 1. All this data is publicly known, which is a good thing. In this case, you might actually ask if our transactions are sent not to Ethereum directly, but to some kind of a system that operates off-chain, wouldn't it mean that some of my transactions will be basically censored? Because maybe the system might, for example, discard certain transactions sent by certain persons maybe. Wouldn't it be a problem? And actually, well, that's a fair question. But the answer is quite simple. In fact, anyone, if so they wish, they might completely bypass this layer 2 solution and send their transaction directly to this smart contract that resides on chain. And inside the smart contract logic, of course, there is no like censorship or anything like that, because the logic of this smart contract is publicly available. So anyone can make sure that this smart contract will never ever censor anyone. That's why this censorship is basically not possible in this case, because you simply might ignore this rollup and just, send your data directly to your smart contract. Also, well, to monitor all this system and to make sure that the rollups are not composed with some malicious data, anyone can basically become something like a validator. So we already know that there are validators on layer 1, but a similar concept actually exists in layer 2. So anyone can maybe stake some amount maybe of ETH or some asset and also become maybe a validator and make sure that everything is running smoothly. Actually, let's also try to compare the gas costs in like layer 1 and we in layer 2. Typically, well, a regular transaction on layer 1 consists of 112 bytes of information. Of course, this is a really rough estimate, whereas when using layer 2, this number goes to just 12 bytes. So a single transaction that is then wrapped in a rollup. Now let's do some calculations. So every block that we create on Ethereum roughly contains 15 million of gas. The maximum would be actually 30 million of gas, but ideally we strive to keep this number at something around 15 million. Also, well, to verify 1 byte of information, you basically need 16 gas. So if you divide this 15 million by 16, you will get something around this amount of bytes. This is a rough number, but still. So an average block contains this amount of bytes. Okay, taking these numbers into account, we can say that a regular block might contain 78,000 roll-up transactions that come from layer 2 basically, which in turn means something around 39 rollups in total in one block. If we say that every rollup contains something around 2,000 transactions, and then we can say that every block on layer 1 is produced every 15 seconds. You know what it means? It means that by using layer 2, we can process up to maybe 5,000 transactions per second, because, well, you can divide this number by 15 and then you get this number as a result. Of course, this is like a super optimistic estimation because, well, there can be other factors as well, but still you can see that the numbers are really huge. In fact, well, realistically speaking, this number, well, should be divided by 2 at least, or maybe even by 2.5. So modern layer 2 solutions offer up to 2,000 transactions per second, which is still really impressive. So while, as you can see, there are some downsides to these layer 2 solutions, they still offer a really nice performance boost. And so this is it for this lesson. Now let's proceed to the next one, and I'm going to show you how to deploy your smart contract to Blast.